I was halfway into the driveway when my grip tightened on the steering wheel. Two men I'd never seen before were pinning my wife against our porch rail like she was some kind of criminal. One of them had a fist wrapped around her arm. The other had blood on his knuckles, my wife's blood, trickling down her cheek in thin red streaks that caught the sun. Both wore cheap black tactical vests with big block letters on the back. HOA Patrol. For a moment my mind simply stalled. Like the world had frozen mid-frame. Because nothing about this scene made sense. Then my brain snapped into place. Someone had put their hands on Sarah. And that meant the world was about to change for everyone standing on my lawn. Before we get into what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. To understand how things got this twisted, we have to rewind a bit. We'd moved into this neighborhood for quiet mornings and room for our soon-to-arrive baby. Wide sidewalks, tidy lawns, all the boring things that usually mean safe. Sarah adored it. She'd sip her morning coffee on the porch, humming softly while trimming her roses. Then the HOA started their parade of nonsense. First came a letter. Fence exceeds approved height. Must be reduced or fined. Then another. Unauthorized garden structure. The structure was a small wooden swing Sarah built herself, more sentimental than structural. She handled it patiently, emailed the board, went to a meeting, even brought cookies. I wasn't around. I was still working out of state on a private security contract. That's when she told me about the HOA president, Mara Jennings, a woman with a smile like a blade and a voice sharp enough to scratch glass. She ran the board like a dictator playing neighborhood dress-up. When Sarah told her I'd served in special operations, Mara raised an eyebrow. Rules apply to everyone, she said with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. Even to husbands who think they're above them. That's where it started. The cars idling too long near our house, the notices taped to the mailbox at night, even a fake warning that didn't match any official form. We laughed, until it got weird. Then unsettling. Then dangerous. The morning everything went to hell, I'd only stepped out for 20 minutes to grab lumber for the treehouse I'd promised our kids someday. Sarah stayed behind to water the roses. She called me just after noon, her voice level but uneasy. There are two men in the yard, she whispered. They're wearing vests that say HOA Patrol. Do we even have something like that? I told her to lock the door. She agreed. 20 minutes later, I turned onto our street, and saw her cornered. Her phone lay shattered in the dirt. One man, tall, thick-necked, buzz-cut, was barking about non-compliance. The other was waving a clipboard like a warrant. I stepped out of the truck. Every muscle in my body went cold and sharp. What did you do to my wife? My voice wasn't loud, just precise. Clipboard guy lifted a hand. Sir, stay back. This is official HOA enforcement. Sarah looked at me with wide, wet eyes. He hit me, she whispered. Everything inside me went quiet. Not calm. Dead silent. And when a man like me goes silent, things end. I stepped forward. Let her go. The bigger one puffed up, flashing a cheap tin badge. We're authorized to. He never finished the sentence. When his hand moved toward his hip, toward what he wanted me to believe was a holster, I pulled the trigger. What? Controlled. Center mass. He fell instantly, the fake badge bouncing beside him on the grass. The entire street went still. Even the breeze seemed to pause. The second man froze, horror widening his eyes. You shot him, he gasped, stumbling back. He grabbed for his radio. Bad mistake. I was on him before he could breathe. Training does that, it makes distance disappear. He swung wildly, panicked. I slipped under his arm, twisted his wrist until he shrieked and struck him in the throat, not to kill, just to cut the fight out of him. But I wasn't done. Not after what he'd done to Sarah. My knee cracked into his ribs. What? Twice. His breath collapsed into a broken groan. He dropped, gasping, trying to crawl. I grabbed the back of his vest, hauled him upright, and pressed him to the fence. Who sent you? My voice didn't shake. His did. Silence. Trembling. Then. It was Mara. Mara Jennings. His breath rattled. She told us to scare your wife, make her sign the fines. Sarah sucked in a breath behind me, pressing her hand to her bruised cheek. I shoved him to the ground and stepped away. Sarah, I said quietly, call 911. Her fingers shook, but her voice didn't. By the time sirens echoed down the street, the truth was written plainly across our yard. Broken vests, fake badges, a bruised woman, and a husband who had finally reached his limit. The neighbors gathered. Phones came out. Whispers spread. I didn't care. Because this wasn't about fences anymore. It was about the line someone crossed. And the line I drew back, red and blue lights flickered across the fence where Sarah's blood still streaked the wood, where the men had fallen like discarded pieces of a bad plan. The first sheriff's cruiser swerved to a stop, gravel crunching under the tires. Sheriff Eli Monroe stepped out, a man built like an oak stump and known for having a radar for trouble. He looked at the scene once and you could see it hit him instantly. The battered woman, the fake tactical gear, the counterfeit badges, one man dead and the other whimpering on the lawn like a broken thing. "Sir," he said carefully, "set the firearm on the ground and step away." I did exactly that. Slowly. Both hands raised, palms open. "I'm the homeowner," I said. "My wife was attacked." These men impersonated officers. Monroe lifted a hand to his deputy, signaling her to lower her weapon. "We've been getting calls for days about fake HOA security teams hassling folks. Looks like they got bold with the wrong house." He crouched beside the man I'd shot. A medic checked the pulse, then shook his head. No response. Monroe didn't flinch. He'd seen worse. What mattered to him now were the details. The badges that didn't match county issue, the flimsy vests printed with intimidation instead of authority, the bruises blooming across Sarah's cheek. The surviving man lay on his side, clutching his ribs, gasping like he'd swallowed fire. Monroe knelt beside him. "Name?" he demanded. "Lance," he wheezed. She made us do it." "Who?" Monroe pushed. "Mara. Mara Jennings." Monroe's jaw tightened. "That HOA president?" The man nodded weakly. Two more cruisers rolled up. Deputies spread out, marking off the yard, snapping pictures, collecting the broken phone, the clipboard full of fake violation slips, the cheap tin badges. Sarah sat on the porch, an ice pack pressed to her cheek, her breath shaky. A paramedic asked her questions softly, but she just repeated the same line like she was stuck in a loop. "He hit me. He hit me over a fence notice." Hearing her say it out loud made something inside me twist. Monroe stepped back to me. His voice dropped. "Look, from where I'm standing, this is self-defense. They came onto your property, assaulted your wife, impersonated law enforcement. You did what any trained man would do." "She's pregnant," I said quietly. Those two words shook more out of him than the gunshot had. He looked toward Sarah, small, trembling, but strong in a way that made the porch lights feel warm for the first time in hours. "Get the conscious one cuffed and ready for transport," Monroe ordered his deputies. "We'll question him at the hospital." The surviving man wailed when they lifted him, ribs protesting every breath. Hours later, we were sitting in a small interview room at the sheriff's office, the walls smelling like stale coffee and old paper. Our statements lined up perfectly, timestamps, call records, everything. Even better? The deputies had searched the surviving man's pockets and found his phone. It was full of text messages. All from one contact, Mara J. "Scare her. Don't leave until she signs. Use force if you have to. She's stubborn. Take photos for leverage." Each message was a nail in her coffin. By sundown, the district attorney was on site, eyebrows raised nearly to his hairline as he read the messages. He gave Monroe one look and said, "Pick her up." Deputies arrived at Mara Jennings' home just in time to catch her stepping out in a silk robe with a glass of wine in hand. She tried to spin the story, claimed she was protecting the neighborhood from noncompliance. When they read the charges to her, she laughed. Then she saw the evidence bag holding her own text messages. The laugh died in her throat. The news vans were circling by morning. Every headline said the same thing. Fake HOA enforcers arrested after violent confrontation. President implicated. Maple Hollow corruption scandal. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact walked by our porch now with quiet nods of respect. Or maybe fear. I wasn't sure which. When evening settled, Sarah and I finally returned home. The yard was quiet, the police tape removed, the porch swept clean except for one faint line of dried blood the rain hadn't reached yet. She stood beside me beneath the porch light, touching the bruise on her cheek gently. "You could have walked away," she whispered. "You didn't have to do all that." "Yes," I said, looking into her tired eyes, "I did. They came to scare us. They thought we'd fold." Sarah swallowed, her hand finding mine. "They forgot who you were," she murmured. "And who I protect," I answered. For the first time since morning she leaned into me, not weak, not broken, but safe. That night I realized something. Some fights aren't about fences or fines. They're about drawing a line so clear that no one ever dares to cross it again. The days that followed felt unreal, quiet mornings, cautious neighbors, and reporters circling like vultures until the sheriff finally pushed them off our street. But beneath all that silence, something else grew, the truth. Real, documented, undeniable truth. The surviving attacker talked. A lot. Once the pain medicine kicked in at the hospital, he practically begged to confess. Deputies recorded everything: who hired them, how much they were paid, where the cash came from, and what they were instructed to do. Every word pointed back to one person: Mara Jennings. She wasn't just running an HOA. She had turned it into her own personal enforcement squad, paid for by everyone's monthly dues. When the DA's office finished digging, they uncovered enough dirt to bury her whole reputation: misused funds, fake compliance agents, forced signatures, intimidation tactics, even an unregistered slush account. The kind of crimes that don't just lead to fines, but prison time. The court move was fast, almost shockingly fast. Mara's lawyer tried to argue she was protecting the community, but the judge wasn't buying it. Not when the evidence included messages ordering men to use force if needed. Not when a pregnant woman stood in the courtroom with a bruise on her face. Not when a man had died wearing a vest she paid for. Mara broke the day the surviving attacker testified. She didn't scream, didn't fight, just sagged in her chair like someone had cut her strings. The plea deal came next: 6 years in state prison. More than she expected. Less than she deserved. Her hired enforcer got 3 years, aggravated assault and trespassing. He didn't argue. He knew he was lucky. And just like that, the neighborhood shifted. People who once complained about our fence height were suddenly dropping off casseroles, muttering "we're so sorry," pretending they hadn't looked away when Sarah was being harassed. Some meant it, some didn't. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that Sarah was safe. One night, about a week after everything ended, Sarah and I stood again on the same porch where the whole nightmare had happened. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass. The yard was quiet, almost peaceful, except for the faint, nearly invisible mark on the fence where her blood had once streaked. She touched her cheek, the bruise now fading into a softer shade of purple. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly. "Every second," I answered. Not with regret, but with clarity. "I didn't want you to have to do that," she whispered. "But I'm glad you did." I looked out toward the street, the same street where I'd seen her cornered, terrified, helpless. And yet here she was now, standing stronger than she'd ever looked. "They came to our home," I said quietly. "They laid hands on my wife. They thought the rules they made were bigger than the law. Bigger than us." She leaned into me gently. "And then they found out who they were dealing with," she murmured. I smiled, a small one, the kind you give when the storm finally passes. "Exactly." We stayed like that for a while, letting the night settle around us. Somewhere down the street a dog barked softly. A porch light flicked on. Life was returning to normal, slowly, cautiously, but unmistakably. Before we went inside, Sarah looked up at me one last time. "You think it's over?" "It is now," I told her. "No one's ever touching you again. Not while I'm here." She exhaled, a long breath, the kind someone releases when the weight finally lifts. As we closed the door behind us, I glanced once more at the yard. The memory would never disappear. I knew that. But neither would the message it left. If you come to my home pretending to be a soldier, you better be ready to meet one. And if protecting my family makes me the villain in someone else's story, so be it. Because I'd do it all again. Every second. Every shot. Every strike. Some lines aren't meant to be crossed. And some men aren't meant to be tested.